You write in Manufacturing Consent that it's the primary function of the mass media in the United States to mobilize public support for the special interests that dominate the government and the private sector. What are those interests?
Well, if you want to understand the way any society works, ours or any other, the first place to look is who is in a position to make the decisions that determine the way the society functions. Societies differ, but in ours, the major decisions over what happens in the society, decisions over investment and production and distribution and so on, are in the hands of a relatively concentrated network of major corporations and conglomerates and investment firms and so on. They are also the ones who staff the major executive positions in the government, and they're the ones who own the media, and they're the ones who have to be in a position to make the decisions. They have an overwhelmingly dominant role in the way life happens, what's done in the society. Within the economic system, by law and in principle, they dominate. The control over resources and the need to satisfy their interests imposes very sharp constraints on the political system and the ideological system.
When we talk about manufacturing of consent, whose consent is being manufactured?
To start with, there are two different groups. We can get into more detail, but at the first level of approximation, there's two targets for propaganda. One is what's sometimes called the political class. There's maybe 20% of the population, which is relatively educated, more or less articulate. They play some kind of role in decision-making. They're supposed to sort of participate in social life, either as managers or cultural managers, like, say, teachers and writers and so on. They're supposed to vote. They're supposed to play some role in the way economic and political and cultural life goes on. Now, their consent is crucial. It's one group that has to be deeply indoctrinated. Then there's maybe 80% of the population whose main function is to follow orders and not to think, and not to pay attention to anything. And they're the ones who usually pay the costs.
All right. Professor Chomsky, you outlined a model with filters that propaganda is sent through. That's way to the public. Can you briefly outline those?
It's basically an institutional analysis of the major media, what we call a propaganda model. We're talking primarily about the national media, those media that sort of set a general agenda that others more or less adhere to the extent that they even pay much attention to national or international affairs. Now, the elite media are the agenda-setting media. That means the New York Times, the Washington Post, the major television channels, and so on. They set the general framework. local media more or less adapt to their structure.
World News. It's a soundbite that says that there's a beachhead.
I think 628 is a good one.
Yeah, but I think 6 is a good start.
This is the operative soundbite for us. He's ours.
He really knows how to play this.
We've got a minute for all the time, so that's...
I love this soundbite.
Okay, well,
And they do this in all sorts of ways, by selection of topics, by distribution of concerns, by emphasis and framing of issues, by filtering of information, by bounding of debate within certain limits.
2.5 minutes to air. 45 seconds.
They determine, they select, they shape, they control, they restrict in order to serve the interests of dominant elite groups in the society.
There is an unusual amount of attention focused today on the 5 nations of Central America.
This is Democracy's Diary. Here for our instruction are triumphs and disasters, the pattern of life's changing fabric. Here is great journalism, a revelation of the past, a guide to the present, and a clue to the future.
The New York Times is certainly the most important newspaper in the United States, and one could argue the most important newspaper in the world. The New York Times plays an enormous role in shaping the perception of the current world on the part of the politically active, educated classes. Also, the New York Times has a special role, and I believe its editors probably feel that they bear a heavy burden in the sense that the New York Times creates history.
What happened years ago may have a bearing on what happens tomorrow. Millions of clippings are preserved in the Times library, all indexed for instant use, a priceless archive of events and the men who make them.
That is, history is what appears in the New York Times archives. The place where people will go to find out what happened is the New York Times. Therefore, it's extremely important, if history is going to be shaped in an appropriate way, that certain things appear, certain things not appear, certain questions be asked, other questions be ignored, and that issues be framed in a particular fashion. Now, in whose interests is the history being so shaped? Well, I think that's not very difficult to answer. Now, to eliminate confusion, all of this has nothing to do with liberal or conservative bias. According to the propaganda model, both liberal and conservative wings of the media, whatever those terms are supposed to mean, fall within the same framework of assumptions. In fact, if the system functions well, it ought to have a liberal bias, or at least appear to, because if it appears to have a liberal bias, that will serve to bound thought even more effectively. In other words, if the press is indeed adversarial and liberal and all these bad things, then how can I go beyond it? They're already so extreme in their opposition to power that to go beyond it would be to take off from the planet. So therefore, it must be that the presuppositions that are accepted in the liberal media are sacrosanct, can't go beyond them. And a well-functioning system would in fact have a bias of that kind. The media would then serve to say, in effect, thus far and no further. We ask, what would you expect of those media on just relatively uncontroversial, guided free market assumptions? And when you look at them, you find a number of major factors entering into determining what their products are. These are what we call the filters. So one of them, for example, is ownership. Who owns them? The major agenda-setting media, after all, what are they? As institutions in the society, what are they? Well, in the first place, they are major corporations, in fact, huge corporations. Furthermore, they're integrated with and sometimes owned by even larger corporations, conglomerates, so for example, by Westinghouse and GE and so on.
What I wanted to know was how specifically the elites control the media. What I mean is, I guess...
It's like asking, how do the elites control General Motors? Well, why isn't that a question? I mean, General Motors is an institution of the elites. They don't have to control it. They own it. So what we have in the first place is major corporations which are parts of even bigger conglomerates. Now, like any other corporation, they have a product which they sell to a market. The market is advertisers, that is, other businesses. What keeps the media functioning is not the audience. They make money from their advertisers. And remember, we're talking about the elite media, so they're trying to sell a good product, a product which raises advertising rates. And ask your friends in the advertising industry, that means that they want to adjust their audience to the more elite and affluent audience. That raises advertising rates. So what you have is institutions, corporations, big corporations, that are selling relatively privileged audiences to other businesses. Well, what point of view would you expect to come out of this? I mean, without any further assumptions, what you'd predict is that what comes out is a picture of the world, a perception of the world that satisfies the needs and the interests and the perceptions of the sellers, the buyers, and the product. Now, there are many other factors that press in the same direction. If people try to enter the system who don't have that point of view, they're likely to be excluded somewhere along the way. After all, no institution is going to happily design a mechanism to self-destruct. It's not the way institutions function. So they all work to exclude or marginalize or eliminate dissenting voices or alternative perspectives and so on because they're dysfunctional. They're dysfunctional to the institution itself.
The Red Dwarf, the Devil of Detroit, the Demon of the Strait. Sound familiar? Let me tell you the story of the Nain Rouge. Among all the impish offspring of the stone god, wizards, and witches that made Detroit feared by the early settlers, none were more dreaded than the Nain Rouge. This Detroit legend goes back to its founder, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac. The Red Imp is said to be malevolent if offended, but capable of being appeased by flattery. Cadillac was warned by a sorceress named Mère Minique before he founded Detroit. She warned him to appease and not to offend the Nain Rouge. Cadillac would eventually meet the imp, which he then struck with his cane, offending the Red Dwarf. And as folklore has it, the Demon of the Strait cursed Cadillac and Detroit. This tale lends itself why Detroit has its past marred by tragedy. The Detroit Devil often appears before disaster strikes and is taken as a warning. Something malicious is going to happen to Detroit. It was seen in 1763, scampering along the shore the night before the Battle of Bloody Run, which afterwards ran red with the blood of British soldiers. In 1805, it was seen before a fire broke out that nearly burned Detroit to the ground. And in 1967, he was claimed to be seen before the riots. So how does Detroit deal with the Red Imp? They march it right out of town. Every year, the Marche des Nains Rouges is held in the spring and draws thousands of costumed participants to the Casse Corridor neighborhood, where the crowd chases the effigy of the demon away, thus banishing the imp from Detroit for another year. So there you have it, the history of the Nain Rouge. Strange, there was no march this year. You haven't seen them, have you?
The occult recognizes Detroit as some kind of power point for the paranormal and supernatural powers. Now, when talking about the Hart Plaza, every site will try to explain why the end results from seemingly unconnected circumstances came about. We can avoid this controversy when you understand where the inspiration comes from. From the biblical concept, the inspirations are coming from very physical angelic beings called the fallen angels. With them are the disembodied remains from the hybrid offspring of Genesis 6 that we now call demons. Both of these entities can move interdimensionally through time and space. They can inspire individuals and create things to their will and end conclusion, like placing pieces of a chess game piece by piece through the centuries and decades without notice, concluding the end result of a fully developed endgame checkmate. However, all they will ever achieve will be a check, and the God alone has the checkmate. The created will never surpass the creator. With this, we are now ready to take a look at Hart Plaza. We will look at both the occult and biblical perspectives of each icon here. Then we will see the current use as a sonic weapon of mind control and conditioning for the masses, and a possible technological use as a weapon of creating a real wormhole stargate. First, everything from the eastern side of Jefferson Avenue is the heavens reaching out to man. On the other side, it is man's response or reaching toward the heavens. The pattern of streets connecting both endpoints makes it a perfect pentagram. Standing before the gateway to freedom of slavery, every point of the Underground Railroad from all over the U.S. led to this final point to freedom, crossing the river into Canada. This was a freedom from slavery, a gateway. Notice everything is in triangles. Notice the lights on either side. They are known as the eternal lights of Egypt. There are also little people inside the base, and I'm not sure what that means. The next gateway is what I call the ugly sludge tank. It is a tower sitting on the base of none other than the Tower of Babel. This is known as the gateway to heaven and the ancient gods. The camera on top, covering the circumference, could be alluding to the Watchers. This was the first act of rebellion to a new world order that failed. It could also be some kind of piece of technology serving as a capacitor. Before we get into the detail of the fountain, I want you to look at the fountain in relation to the north side, where there is an Aztec pyramid with a sacrificial altar on top, looking down to an amphitheater. On the south end is the huge music amphitheater where all of the major concerts take place. The three objects are in alignment to the same as the pyramids of Giza and the pyramids of Sidona, Mars. They represent the belt of the constellation Orion. This connection, we will see, is a theme throughout the whole Hart Plaza Campus Martius walk. As we go underneath the Aztec amphitheater, we see the Rose Well. I am not sure about too much about it other than its name. I would refer you to the work of my late friend David Flynn, author of Sidona, The Last Chronicles of Mars, and his twin brother Mark Flynn, author of The Labyrinth. Now let's talk about the fountain. It was Horace Dodge and his son Horace Jr. who financed the making of the fountain. They grew up in Niles, Michigan. Horus and Horus Jr. were the two Egyptian gods that influenced or brought about Set, Osiris, and Isis into the prominent Egyptian trinity of primary gods, also along the Nile River. They commissioned the famous Japanese artist Isamu Noguchi. He was fascinated with outer space and wanted his fountain to look like something related. From Canada, on a bright day, the fountain looks like a UFO. The fountain was finished in 1975. With my background in welding fabrication, the first time I saw this, I wondered why a traditional 3 legs were not made for this ring of water. To make it with only 2 legs means you would have to double the thickness of the legs to support it on an X and Y axis. This is a considerable amount of money for some etherical look, I thought. Whatever reason, the outcome is commonly known that this represents the ancient goddess Nut. She is in an arched birthing position representing a bridge. When the fountain was working with water flowing, a constant rainbow could be seen above. This was the rainbow bridge of many mythical cultures where it is a crossing of life to death. In this case of Nut, she was to take her people to their eternal reward and then take back all their knowledge that they had and give it back to the living. From a biblical viewpoint, Nut was a hybrid from Genesis 6 that was worshipped as a false goddess. She was then taking people to hell, and then all the knowledge that got them there she was imparting back to the living. Isamu Noguchi laid out the entire Hart Plaza, expecting other pieces to be placed when and where it would be needed. I wanted to take a picture of the entire fountain, and so I stepped back, and when I saw this fountain, it looked like a huge SETI satellite dish set on its side. I then realized this looked like a collector and a projector of some type. A friend of mine who at the time had better understanding of plasma energy told me that one of the noble gases that can be converted into plasma energy was radon. Radon is found in all water. I knew this because our home, when I was a child, was built over a swamp, and we had a large amount of radon gas coming into our home, as the detector indicated. He also said that the solid material that also held the largest amount of radon was red granite. This thing was sitting in a bowl of red granite. I was looking at a converter and a projector of radon gas. With the fountain at the center point, to the right we have another edition of Isamu Noguchi, the obelisk, or what is called the pylon. It's 120 feet tall. It is made in a 1/4 spiral twist. He did this to allude to a double helix coil to represent man's ascension to godhood. Retaining his Shinto and Buddhist beliefs, this would be the ideal reflection that he would give us. From the biblical perspective, this is yet another act of rebellion of man trying to be his own God by genetic manipulation or mind development apart from God and his provisions. The obelisk always marks the entrance to an Egyptian temple. This is exactly what we see here, is the marking of Hart Plaza as an Egyptian temple. This also represents the male phallic symbol and also can make a pretty good lightning rod. To the left we have the female counterpart of Stargate. This was created by artist David Barr. With an engineering background, he chose a special kind of gear with the teeth on the inside as opposed to being on the outside. The whole purpose of this sculpture was to celebrate the labor of man's desire for achievement, the hopes and dreams that labor can bring into reality. The gap on top represents the unfinished goal yet to be achieved. The Stargate in the bright sunlight, in a manner it is polished, gives a three-dimensional effect as you can see your hand slip right through the gate. The gate sits on a base that is reversed counterclockwise spiral. This symbol, as a base, is a universal image used in all cultures on all continents as a symbol of a portal or gateway to other realms. Surrounded are 14 stones of granite, individually depicting the hopes and struggles of labor to produce results. This was granted by artist Sergio Di Gusti after winning a contest. The stones look like the stones around Stonehenge, England. As a piece of technology, this can become a real Stargate. This is how all of these pieces mentioned before can come together. Lightning hits the pylon or obelisk. It then charges the water fountain converter, making a plasma, and then sending it above. Is there a mirror or something that sends it back down to be separated into two charges of negative and positive? This is where the sludge tank on the Tower of Babylon is a capacitor that splits the plasma into two different charged forms. One charge is made by salt. Hart Plaza is sitting on an underground salt mine. The other charge is made from zinc. The stainless steel used here is a special kind that through hydrothermal process zinc can be infused not as a coating but as an integrated bonding of zinc within the stainless steel. This makes the other charge. The Stargate then is charged on either side, and the gap is like a gap on a spark plug. It creates a supercharged plasma that theoretical physicists say make a real wormhole or Stargate. This is focused on the huge cell tower that serves also as an emergency military radio system that has a line on the huge cell tower that serves also as an emergency military radio system that has a line
on the huge cell tower that serves also as an emergency military radio system that has a line
of sight posting from east coast to the west coast every 120 miles apart. In this, the focus can project instantly whatever happens here in Detroit. The effect will be immediately and be sent from coast to coast throughout the entire country in a blink of an eye. Next, we need to take a look at the concert hall amphitheater. The band shell is deep inside and the echo effect is amazing. The speaker system redirects the airwaves into the center of Woodward, pointing toward Campus Martius. This is possibly the sonic technology being used today to condition the masses in the Detroit community and why there is such crime and predatory actions by the people and the police. Before we cross Jefferson, we have to meet Augustus Woodward. In 1805, the city of Detroit completely burned down from a man who was cleaning his pipe. As he tapped his pipe clean, an ash fell to the smoldered into a fire that destroyed the entire city. Augustus Woodward was a high mason, was chosen to be the one to, like a phoenix, revive the city back to life from the ashes. He was the first governing body to be put in complete charge for this project. He used a stone pillar for his surveying, and from that point of origin extended 5 streets like rays directing the entire layout of Detroit and the outlying areas that would become the greater Detroit metropolitan area. We will get to that down the road of Woodward later. He had a friendship with Charles Lenant, the man who set up Washington, D.C. in the Masonic occult layout and copied the same style for Detroit. The fist of Joe Louis, suspended on its own pyramid, was commissioned by Sports Illustrated and created by artist Robert Graham. I always wondered, like many, that if this was Joe Louis's fist, why did he not wear a boxing glove on it? It always reminded me of the fist of Black Power. I do not mean a militant negative way, but rather the final power to be equal and free in citizenship. This combination of the triangle pyramid has the most important Masonic meaning. This represents a new beginning to a new order on the highest level of Masonry. With this being on the intersection of Jefferson and Woodward, a connection may be suggested. A few blocks down on Jefferson is the statue of George Washington at the Mariners Church, and included into this Masonic rite of passage to a new order. We also see that this fist is directly in line to the cell tower. The focus of the sonic power from the amphitheater goes directly into the fist and tower to the end of the road at Campus Martius CompuWare building. Next we will come to the Spirit of Detroit statue. This was built in the 1950s by Marshall Frederick. The man was the spirit of mankind reaching out for liberty and justice. The left hand is holding what is supposed to be the image for God, and the other hand the family as the most important, smallest unit of government to society, bound by the scriptural statement on the wall of 2 Chronicles 3:17. When you take a closer look at the orb of God held in the left hand, you will see a ring around the orb. This is Saturn, the symbol for Kronos, the god of time. This is yet another allusion to the control of space and time by the ancient gods from the biblical lens, the fallen ones. On the other side of the street, we see the Guardian Building. This building is a psychedelic experience of color and style mixture of Art Deco and Aztec culture. The building was originally the Union Trust Building, a bank where people put their money and treasures deep in the underground vaults for safekeeping. Designed by Michigan architects, erected by Michigan contractors, and built by Michigan artisans, the Guardian Building is virtually a temple of Michigan commerce and ingenuity. During World War II, the Guardian Building would serve as headquarters for wartime production when Detroit was called the Arsenal of Democracy. You see, Detroit assembly production did something no other nation in recorded history ever accomplished. In any war, no nation fighting a two-front war ever won. Trying to supply two fronts failed each time. In Detroit, the assembly lines of production was duplicated across the nation, and the U.S. from Detroit not only supplied two fronts, it supplied two separate wars on multiple fronts, and also provided two allies through the Lend-Lease program supplies also. On top of the building at night, an 8-point star shined into the night sky. This star has an origin in ancient Samaria and is found to represent Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, and also Ishtar, Babylonian goddess known as the Light Bringer. Today, what secrets about space and time and manipulation are being held there? Next we come to the Civil War Memorial. This was commissioned by the government in 1867 and created by artist Randolph Rogers. It is an octagonal pyramid ziggurat in the entrance to Campus Martius. Campus Martius means in English the encampment of Mars. The New Age and occult belief is that the eagles surrounding the base are associated with spirit guides and are there to lead the way. They also believe that the 4 soldiers are being crowned with rewards from the angelic beings above. The top figure, they say, is a guardian angel. In a different reality, staying on the same theme presented, this is the gateway to Camp Mars. That is no angel above, that is the god of war, Mars. This same image is repeated in history as the god of war, Mars, and has nothing to do with angels. The eagles below has a scriptural reference to it in Matthew 24, where Jesus said, "Wheresoever the eagles gather, there the carcass lies." So where the eagles gather, there is death and destruction. The 4 angelic beings are warning of 2 civil wars. One angel has the open sheath ready for war. The other has a book as the Bible. The other holds the symbol of Roman rule, and the other is holding 2 wreaths, meaning there will be 2 civil wars. I believe the second one yet to come will be one that will be like Lebanon's war in the 70s. There were so many factions fighting based on religion, race, political affiliation, and economic status, many would take the enemy of my enemy alliances, and it was hard to know just who was fighting who. This is what the second one will become for us here in America. Next, we are in the Camp of Mars, the god of war. In front we see the end of the road, the pinnacle point where man or earth reaches back toward the heavens or the pit as it opens in sonic or real technology to receive what it is giving. The CompuWare building was built in 2003 with the address of 1 Campus Martius. It stands 18 stories high and 2 stories below ground. It is a pentagon that completes the pentagram layout of the entire area of Hart Plaza and Campus Martius. Being on the end of the earth, reaching out for what heaven is offering or what the pit is giving to man, forms another interesting symbol. 2 of the rays or streets set up like rays makes the symbol the same as the symbol from the movie Stargate. This would be the necessary area code to dial in an address in directing a wormhole to its destination. The sonic tune necessary may be also provided in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If you notice the metallic bar in front of the CompuWare building, it has the same polished stainless steel found at Hart Plaza, making some kind of connection to both sonic and literal wormhole connections. When the bottomless pit is opened in Revelation 9, it is described as an angel that comes down with a key that opens the pit. In 8 points, it describes the creature as some modified grasshopper, and out of today's technology, we can create something like this, but it has nothing to do with what is coming out here. When there are other areas in the Bible that can define the descriptions found in the text, it has to be acknowledged using proper interpretive rules. The proof in this is made by only one word. When it describes the sound of their wings is as the sound of many chariots running into battle, the Greek word is phone. It is where we get the name for a telephone. The literal meaning is a numerical sequence, example, and an address. Something is being dialed in, and what comes out are what is known as the Nordics. Famous warriors looking like beautiful heroes. This is the beings that will appear to be angels of heaven, pretending to be a false second coming of the cosmic Christ, not the real one. CERN is that location in Switzerland that claims to be opening another dimension to our own. They sit on the exact location that in the times of the Roman Empire was the Temple of Apollyon. Revelation 9 says, and the locusts had a king with them, abandoned, and in the Greek, Apollyon, one in the same. In 2011, we had a literal axis shift just before this shift. We had 3 hurricanes appear in a row. This year we have, again, 3 hurricanes appearing with water on one side of the earth flooding, and the opposite side, water dries up. The next day or two, the opposite happens. This is the earth wobbling like a drunkard, to and fro, what is described in Isaiah 24th chapter. On September 23rd, CERN is going to charge up at the same time the earth will go into an axis shift. Like before the two happened together, they will be released just as they were placed in, described in Isaiah 24. If you want to know, as scary as this may seem, I cheated and looked in the back of the Bible in Revelation 19. If you are putting your trust in Jesus, the one of the Bible, not the coming cosmic Christ consciousness, you have nothing to worry about. If you have not made a commitment to Jesus, you have plenty to be concerned about. We are watching the attempts of losers, Satan's best effort coming to fruition over the Battle of Armageddon. They are wiped out by a two-edged sword coming out of the mouth of the Lord. This two-edged sword is the Word of God. We have a pattern for what words could be so powerful. When the Pharisees were outraged by the implication that he, Jesus, was around before Abraham, he simply responded, I am, and they all fell down. When Jesus was going to be arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, they asked him, are you the one we are looking for? And he said, I am. They all fell down. Guess what Jesus will say over the battle of Satan's best effort? I am, and they are completely destroyed. We have these promises if you have been born again and have a relationship with Jesus, not just a name-only religion. In Isaiah 19, no weapon formed against us will prosper, including all that we have discussed here today. Romans 8:38 and 39, for I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. I am going to keep this part as simple as I can for you, just as Jesus said. He said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and sup with him, and he with me. The doorknob is on your side. You have to open the door and your heart to your heart and ask him in. Come in. Right now, pray with me. Jesus, I am sorry for my sins. Forgive me. I believe you are God in the flesh and that you paid the price for my sins. Come into my heart and make me your Lord and God. Thank you, Jesus, for saving me.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want it until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
Bye.